Hi, everyone. I think everybody's in, and if people join us late, Joseph and Jefferson will continue to monitor the waiting room and let people in. In the meantime, buon pomeriggio. I hope everybody is enjoying their weekend. Here in New York City, if that's where you're joining us from, we've had the astonishment of a 40-degree drop in the temperature in 48 hours, but the warm weather was nice while it lasted. And I'm here to welcome everybody this afternoon. And I'm thrilled that Carla Gambescia is with us once again to talk about holiday traditions and Christmas in Italy. And I am not going to give a long intro to Carla, who is well known to most of our members and our audience, but only to say congratulations for her new edition of La Dolce Vita University. And I can't wait till we see you in person in 2022 for a book event. And I'm looking forward to what you might treat us to in this new edition, which is a fat book and filled with all kinds of new content for us. And I've had the pleasure of having a copy on my desk for a while, so I've already indulged substantially in the book. And with that, Carla, I'm going to thank you once again for being with us and turn it over to you to delight our eyes and our ears.
Well, thank you so much. And I guess maybe I could even call the book What I Did During the Pandemic. And also I've created a mug that's a La Dolce Vita University Summa Cum Laude mug. But anyway, I'm also delighted to be giving this talk again. When I created this talk about holiday traditions, I mean, there's something really wonderful about repeating things at the holidays, and from like my earliest memories, just routines or things like seeing Charlie Brown Christmas. So for any of you who've seen this before, I hope that it's good in the retelling of this story. So, okay. So it is the season of nutcrackers and candy canes and sugar plums. And I'm going to kick off my Buon Natale talk by addressing the central figure who represents the spirit of Christmas. And you all might be expecting me to say the baby Jesus, who I will get to in due course. But instead, I'm going to begin with Santa Claus. And as any kid will tell you, Santa hails from the North Pole. However, Santa's historical journey is far longer and with more twists and turns than his annual one-night circumnavigation of the globe. So the progenitor of today's modern-day Santa was born in the Eastern Mediterranean at the time of the Roman Empire, and his legend evolved across Northern Europe until finally assuming his now familiar rotund man in red form on the shores of the New World. So who is this ancestor of Santa, and how does Santa evolve to be such a jolly good fellow? And of course, importantly, the bringer of Christmas presents. So Santa Claus, Sinterklaas, Kris Kringle, Santa Claus is actually a variation of Saint Nicholas of Bari, and Bari, of course, is in Puglia. However, old Saint Nick is not Italiano. He's a Greek, and he's from ancient Myra, now in modern-day Turkey, where he was a Christian bishop. And his feast day is December 6th, the day he's supposed to have died in 343 AD. So why is he Nicholas of Bari if he's really from Greece or Turkey? Well, okay, in 1087, the Barese mounted an expedition to find, or to more accurately acquire, the mortal remains of the saint. Now, the technical term is furta sacra, which means holy theft, the taking or stealing of relics, which was a fairly common practice back in the day. Relics were thought to be very powerful and to confer certain divine protections on their locations, as well as conferring prestige. Now, the Venetians were also very keen on acquiring his relics too, but the Barese got there first, and they brought him back to Bari, where his bones remain today in his namesake cathedral. So how does St. Nicholas, now of Bari, become the central character in our celebration of Christmas? Well, it's all about his extraordinary acts of generosity and the very spirit that motivates giving to others. So there's a lot of different legends of the miracles of St. Nicholas, but one of the very popular and most famous concerns a poor family, a father with 3 daughters, and he's a widower. And this particular legend was really unique and a very unusual story for the time, because back then, stories about saints were usually about these gory martyrdoms, you know, flayings, beheadings, roastings, and the like, or alternatively, saints that would go out into the wilderness and they would fast or they would meditate, you know, not really festive stories. So this particular story was a different sort of story, and one that really captured the popular imagination. So the story goes something like this. We have this poor father. He's very despondent because he has no choice but to sell each of his beloved daughters into prostitution. But each time one came of age, gold miraculously appeared, and enough gold for each daughter to find a respectable husband. So it's kind of a Cinderella story times 3. Now, the anonymous donor, of course, is Nicholas, but this is only revealed later on. So almost always in Christian imagery, in art, and prayer cards, St. Nicholas is depicted holding a staff, which is the bishop's crozier, and wearing this triangular hat, which is a bishop's mitre, and then he's carrying 3 balls, and these gold balls are symbols of the daughters and symbols of St. Nicholas. Now, the logistics of how he actually got the family the gold and what form the gold took is a matter of some debate. So when you see it depicted in art, sometimes he's tossing these gold balls, or sometimes bags of gold, sometimes gold coins through a window, and then there's sometimes down the chimney. So you get where this is going, okay? You see exactly where it's heading. So in this version of the down the chimney, the girls had been drying out their socks, and the gold remarkably ended up in their stockings, and hence the origin of our tradition of hanging stockings by the chimney with care in the hopes that St. Nicholas, and you know the rest. But of course, the big idea is the concept of generosity and goodwill towards others, even those that we don't know. So during the Middle Ages, St. Nicholas's feast day, December 6th, began to be celebrated, and to commemorate his generosity, small gifts were given, especially to children, which was kind of an early version of what today we would call Christmas. So how did St. Nicholas become associated with December 25th? How did we move from his feast day on the 6th to the 25th? Well, this brings me to this gentleman, Martin Luther, and the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. Now, Martin Luther wasn't much of a festive sort of guy, and he really sought to eliminate what he considered to be the church's distracting obsession with saints and their worship. And he decided that it would be best to transfer the tradition of giving gifts on St. Nicholas, his feast day on the 6th, to Christmas Day on the 25th, to keep the focus on Jesus. But, you know, this gift part was very, very popular. So for Luther, he probably would have wanted to eliminate the gift thing entirely, but this would have just been like a bridge too far. So now we have the baby Jesus as the bringer of hope and joy and Christmas presents. But even little children understand that a little baby couldn't possibly deliver all those presents. So the baby Jesus needed an assistant. So this is how St. Nicholas ended up becoming better known by the German name Santa Claus than by his Italian name, Saint Nicholas, and how Santa Claus was eventually conflated with Kris Kringle, which actually means Christ the King. So now we can see how Saint Nicholas, we see these depictions in art, and he's got like a skinny nose, and he's actually a skinny guy. And they have his bones, and it would seem he was small and very, narrow-faced. So how did we get to this Santa of our collective imagination? This large, jolly fellow with a fur-trimmed red velvet ensemble. Well, this brings me to upstate New York, to the city of Troy to be exact, and the year is 1823, when a truly magical poem, originally entitled A Visit Sent from St. Nicholas, now better known as The Night Before Christmas, was first published on December 23rd in the newspaper, the Troy Sentinel. And it's because of this poem that our image of Santa was born. And in this poem, St. Nicholas is described as being chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf. And we know the rest by heart, with a round little belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. But the poem describes him as a little guy, as an elf, with a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. And we've forgotten about the elf part, but we all know the names of the reindeer by heart, on Dasher and Dancer and Prancer and Vixen, on Comet and Cupid, and Donner and Blitzen. And interesting, the Dutch, Donner and Blitzen, means thunder and lightning. So I think that's cool. So anyway, so how did Santa become big? Okay, he was an elf. Well, it wasn't a magical Zoltar machine. So the Santa of our collective imagination was made visually iconic by none other than the power of advertising by a then fledgling company founded in Atlanta in 1886, the Coca-Cola Company. And Coke, during the Depression and through World War II, created and appropriated the image of Saint Nick as their celebrity spokesperson. And it was really a great choice. They got him for nothing, and he waived all his residuals. And nowadays, these ads, if you're a collector of this sort of thing, they cost quite a few gold balls. Yeah, so anyway, and they're very, very collectible. But again, there's one other thing I forgot to mention, a really important fact about Santa Claus, and key to another tradition is candy canes. Okay, so which is a symbol that we associate with Christmas. I heard somewhere on the news that there's in the supply chain thing, there's a shortage of candy canes, which is not great. So anyway, but the symbol of the candy cane comes from St. Nicholas's crozier, the bishop's staff. And you can see that the shape of the staff and the shape is what we derive the shape of the candy cane. So we can see how much of today's Christmas symbolism was first born out of the legends of St. Nicholas and his generosity, then in the Middle Ages, celebrating this idea of generosity first on St. Nicholas's feast day on the 6th, and then filtered through the Protestant Reformation, moving the tradition of gift giving to Christmas Day. But I want to get to the baby Jesus, since the holiday is about celebrating his birth. And our word Christmas, its roots refer to Jesus Christ, and then Mass, Messiah. So it's Christ the King, King of the Jews. So, however, the December 25th doesn't really jive with what astrologers and the star in the East would have suggested. And based on the descriptions of the Gospels, it's much more likely that Jesus was born sometime in the spring. So how do we get from the 25th or how did we get from this to the 25th? Well, it just so happened that the ancient Romans celebrated a really major festival around the time of the winter solstice, the biggest and most festive festival of the entire year. And it was known as Saturnalia. And so Saturnalia was super important to the Romans because it marked the end of one agricultural cycle and the beginning of another. And it was a multi-day affair, a week, roughly December 17th to the 23rd, then followed by another 2-day celebration of the sun god, Sol Invictus, which means the unconquerable sun. And so anyway, so this is all kind of a little bit trippy, right? So this kind of coincidence, and there's a word for this kind of coincidence or conversion and convergence. It's called syncretism, which refers to the merging of different beliefs, customs, and traditions, which often happens in transitional periods of history. So what happened was Constantine was the first Christian emperor, and he made Christianity the religion of the empire in the year 312 AD. And then it was only after that, like 25 years later, that the church followers recognized Christ's dated birth as December 25th, which coincided very conveniently with these celebrations of Saturnalia and Sol Invictus. And so it's pretty interesting, in the Neapolis near St. Peter's, these are images of Sol Invictus, and you have his halo, so this is kind of just very, very interesting. It looks like a halo. So this idea of sort of superimposing the birth of Jesus, Son of God, with a major pagan holiday celebrating the sun god, it keeps timing very consistent, so the Christians have something to celebrate and so on, and ease the transition to Christianity. And here's another really interesting image dated or in the late 300s AD from the catacombs in Rome. And you can see the man is pointing to the sun, but then we have an early depiction of the Madonna and Child. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit more about Saturnalia and Saturn. So Saturn was really the big daddy of all the Roman deities, and he was the equivalent of Kronos in the Greek pantheon of gods, and Kronos was god of time, the father of Zeus. So Saturn is father of Jupiter, and god of time and the cycles of the season, therefore like the chief god of agriculture and renewal. And for those of you who are familiar with astrology, the sign of Capricorn, the sun enters the sign of Capricorn on December 21st, and it's ruled by the planet of Saturn. So again, we have the beginning of one agricultural cycle and the end of one and the beginning of another. So celebrating this in Rome was really like very festive. Imagine a combination of Christmas, New Year's, and Mardi Gras all rolled into one. And everywhere they would light candles. It was a really big thing to give candles, to break the darkness, and to recognize that light, as in the sun, would soon be returning. And lights were lit throughout the ancient city of Rome. And it is in Rome that this tradition was born, and one that we very much keep alive today. And here are some really some nice images of Florence in December. Everything's very tasty over there. And this is, by the way, I'm broadcasting from Assisi. But anyway, very tasty, these little white lights. They don't do the inflatable thing or anything like that. And then they also would decorate with holly. Interestingly, the tree is an entirely German Tannenbaum, Northern Europe phenomena. And the first time they put up a tree in the Vatican was in 1982. So anyway, but they did have holly, okay? They also gave presents to children, especially, and men wore these kind of party hats. And then they also had this very particular tradition of role reversal. They would, the servants and the masters would shift around for the day. So the masters would serve the servants, and children were in charge. And there was also a lot of feasting, bacchanalian kind of thing. And it's just interesting when you see these pictures. This is how they ate. They didn't have tables and chairs, so you would be on a lounge laying down and eating. But so there was like a lot of this bacchanalian feasting, and then men would run through the streets naked. Okay, so it was pretty crazy. But I do want to like move from this bacchanalian thing, you know, to something more pious and really get to the Christmas story. And so, I mean, all of us, whether Christian or not, have a general idea of how the Christmas story unfolds. But what we don't realize is that the official story really is actually the amalgamation of two passages from two of the four Gospels, only two of the four Gospels. So the Gospel according to Matthew begins with a rather tedious listing of the so-called ancestors of Christ. And it begins with so-and-so to get so-and-so to get so-and-so, essentially connecting Jesus all the way back to Abraham, with Joseph, son of Jacob, husband of Mary, becoming the foster father of Jesus, since Mary is betrothed to Joseph. So Mary is promised to Joseph, but before they tie the knot, Joseph finds out that she is with child. And according to Matthew, Joseph decides to get the contract quietly annulled. Okay, but then Matthew tells us that an angel appeared to Joseph in a dream and tells him it's all good, that the child was conceived by the Holy Spirit, and that he should take Mary as his wife, kind of like an annunciation for Joseph. And this is how Joseph was convinced not to bail out on Mary, even though she's already with child before they're married. So then Matthew tells us that Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem in Judea, which is under the reign of a king named Herod. And then, foreseeing the birth of Jesus, astrologers journeyed from the east, and they stopped off in Jerusalem to ask for directions. And they actually asked the king. They asked King Herod, and they asked, "Where is this child who is born to be king of the Jews?" Explaining they had observed the rising star, his star, and had come a long way to pay homage to him. So no surprise, Herod's like pretty perturbed to learn of the birth of another king in the vicinity, because he's the king and this newborn king could pose a threat to his power. So he feels paranoid, but rather shrewdly tells the three Magi that he doesn't know, but that if they discover where the baby is, to please return and tell him so he too can go and pay homage. Pretty crafty, but in reality, you know, we know that Herod's hoping to get a fix on the location of the newborn king so he can, you know what. So anyway, back to the three kings who follow the star, and then they find the baby Jesus, and Matthew actually uses the word house, not a manger. And this is where the Magi will find the baby Jesus and Mary. And, you know, we know the three kings of Orient are actually, the word Magi is the plural of magus from Greek, which means magician, but not, you know, in a Harry Potter sort of way. Magi refers to these men as being learned men and astrologers who could actually divine from the position of the stars the future. Okay, so the idea here is that important figures, wise men, diviners, journey from all corners of the earth and bow down on the ground to pay homage to Jesus, and each bringing a gift, 3 distinct gifts, which are gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So we're seeing, gifts again. And so these are from the Chapel of the Magi in the Medici Riccardi Chapel in Florence. So the first king is Gaspar, who's an Indian scholar and king, and his gift is gold, and each of the gifts has particular symbolism. With gold, it's a material associated with royalty, since Jesus is king of the Jews. And then the second king is Melchior, who's from Persia. Frankincense is his gift, one that is associated with divinity. And the third wise man is Balthazar, who's a Babylonian scholar. His gift is myrrh, a rare ointment used to anoint the dead before burial, foreshadowing that Jesus is predestined to die for all of us. So these particular gifts, all extraordinary and expensive gifts, are brought to the baby Jesus. So we're introduced to the 3 kings, who are actually only mentioned in the gospel according to Matthew. So what happens now? Okay, so Matthew tells us that the 3 kings had a dream, okay? And they're told not to inform Herod of the newborn's location. So they head home another way, okay? And then sometime after this dream, Joseph has another dream, and an angel appears to him and warns him that he has to get the Holy Family out of Dodge and to head for Egypt. Okay, so get out of Bethlehem as soon as you can, because Herod's going to search out your son and he could kill him. So this prompts the flight into Egypt, and Joseph takes the Holy Family to Egypt, where they remain until Herod's death. But by this time, Herod, who's been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for the astrologers to return, finally figures out they're not coming back. So he resorts to ordering the massacre of all children, not just boys, and the word is children in the gospel, under the age of 2 in Bethlehem and the surrounding vicinity. So this is the infamous massacre of the innocents, Herod's paranoid, crazed attempt to eliminate the potential threat of this newborn destined to be king of the Jews. So our story picks up after King Herod dies, and an angel again appears to Joseph in another dream and tells him it's safe to return to the world, actually Israel. So anyway, this is when the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, settle down in a town called Nazareth in the region of Galilee, and the rest, as they say, is history. So this is the end of Matthew's account of Christmas. Well, what about Mark, the second gospel? So according to Mark, he doesn't deal with the nativity at all. There's no account of the birth and early life of Jesus. His gospel begins with the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist, with the heavens opening up and the Holy Spirit in the form of a dove descending upon Jesus with the words, "Thou art my beloved Son, and thy favor, and on thee my favor rests." So this is how Mark begins, without any mention of the nativity at all. The story of the 3 kings, massacre of the innocents, all of that, only from the Gospel of Matthew. Now, what about Luke? Well, Luke largely corroborates Matthew, but gives us some further information about Jesus's birth. But his gospel begins with Zacharias and Elizabeth, who are the parents of John the Baptist, and who's Jesus's cousin. John's mother, Elizabeth, is Mary's much older cousin, who miraculously gets pregnant when she's 60 years old. And then Mary receives a visit from the angel Gabriel, who tells her she's about to have a child. And this is, of course, the Annunciation. And we now find out how Mary conceived Jesus, which of course is the subject and image that we would be reproduced, over and over and over again in Christian art. And here's where it's during the Annunciation that the famous dialogue takes place. Gabriel says, Ave Maria, Hail Mary, gratia plena, full of grace, Dominus tecum, the Lord is with thee. Now, the Virgin Mary, she's really not able to process she's about to have a child because, she's still a virgin. And Gabriel, to allay her fears and console her, says, do not be afraid, for God has been gracious to you. You shall conceive and bear a son, and you shall give him the name Jesus. And then she responds, thy will be done. Then Mary goes to share the good news with her cousin Elizabeth, who is pregnant. And so they're both pregnant. And when Elizabeth greets Mary, she does so with the words also immortalized in the Hail Mary. Elizabeth says, blessed is the fruit of thy womb, referring, of course, to Jesus in Mary's womb. So this kicks the whole thing off and gives us some important elements, which we only get from the Gospel of Luke. Luke also fills in some gaps left by Matthew. Luke tells us that there was a decree by the Emperor Augustus for a census to be taken throughout the entire Roman world, which is why Mary and Joseph were headed to Bethlehem, the city of David. Historically, there probably wasn't a census, and if there had been, it probably wouldn't have taken place that time of year. But it's important to get them to Bethlehem, the city of David, in order to fulfill the prophecy that the Messiah would be born of the lineage of David. So when they get to Bethlehem, Mary gives birth to Jesus and wraps him in swaddling clothes and, away in a manger, because there was no room in the inn or the house. But it's really only in the Gospel of Luke that we get the term manger. And in Italian, it's mangiatorio, okay, which is a stall and a barn and a place where animals mangiare, okay? So, and so that's where we get our word eat, which is kind of cool. And then we then have the angel that appears to the shepherds and announces glory to God in the highest and peace to his people on earth. And as a result, all the local shepherds hastily make their way to the manger to behold the newborn king. And so the Gospel of Matthew gives us the grandness and pageantry of the Magi who journey a very long way, whereas Luke gives us a much more humble and rustic and intimate nativity in a barn where we just have the local shepherds who have come to adore him. So this is essentially ending what would be the nativity story according to Luke. But then 8 days later, we have the Feast of the Circumcision because Jesus is Jewish and he's brought to the temple for his circumcision and was named Jesus as Gabriel had instructed Mary. And so now everything prescribed by law is fulfilled and they return to Nazareth in Galilee. But again, with Luke, there's no mention of Herod, no mention of the massacre of the innocents, just the fulfillment of the Judaic tradition and law, and then returning to Nazareth where Jesus, and I'm quoting here, quote, grew up to be big and strong and a wise man, and God's favor was clearly upon him, unquote. So in case you're wondering, what about the Gospel of John? What did he say about the baby Jesus? Well, the answer is, he really said nothing. So the Gospel of John is very unique among the Gospels. It's very abstract, and it begins with, in the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was God. So nothing about Jesus's infancy or childhood. But, each year when I put out my nativity set, which is the nativity set from when I was growing up, I think of how we've pieced together this extraordinary dramatic story of the Holy Family making their way to Bethlehem, and how we have these different characters, which are like my figurines, which I played with as a child, but they've really been piecemeal together from different biblical sources. And I want to talk a little bit more now about this tradition of the Christmas creche itself, these cribs or manger scenes that are ubiquitous throughout the holiday, especially in Italy. And when I was growing up, we wouldn't put the baby Jesus into the little crib until after midnight mass. But our collective tradition of setting up a creche began over 800 years ago, thanks to Saint Francis of Assisi. And it began actually as a live reenactment of the Christmas story on Christmas Eve in a tiny town in Tuscany, Greccio. And, you know, Saint Francis was a great reformer, and there's no saint more closely associated with the beauty and simplicity of the natural world. He preached to the animals, and he was all about, you know, voluntary simplicity and very anti-materialism. You know, he would be turning in his grave today. But anyway, his motivation for staging this reenactment of the Nativity was to help ordinary people get engaged emotionally with the miracle of the first Christmas, and to gain a renewed sense of wonder about it. So up until St. Francis's first live creche, Christmas just meant going to mass, hearing the mass in Latin, not really understanding because the average person spoke no Latin. So Christmas was no different than a Sunday. So what he wanted to do was make the extraordinary experience of the first Christmas accessible for ordinary people and to bring it to life. Okay, so he sought the Pope's permission, which he received, and a friend lent him some animals and straw so he could set up a manger to represent Jesus's birth in Bethlehem. So he set this scene up really actually in a cave, kind of rocky like in Jerusalem, just outside of town, and featured a wax figure of the baby Jesus, and he had live animals, donkeys, and an ox. And that night, local shepherds watched over their sheep in nearby fields, just as shepherds had, according to Luke, in Bethlehem on that first Christmas Eve, so very, very long ago, when the sky suddenly filled with angels announcing Christ's birth. So during the Mass, St. Francis told the Christmas story based on the Gospel of Luke and delivered the sermon in the local dialect. And in his biography of Francis, St. Bonaventure described what happened that night, and I'm quoting here. The brethren were summoned, and the forest resounded with their voices, and the night was made glorious by many and brilliant lights, and the sonorous psalms of praise. Francis stood before the manger, full of devotion and piety, and bathed in tears and radiant with joy. He preached to the people around the Nativity, and unable to utter his name, but for the tenderness of his love, he called him the Babe of Bethlehem. So this first Nativity reenactment proved so popular with the people that towns in other areas soon set up living nativities to celebrate Christmas. And now Christians everywhere celebrate with live nativity plays, setting up nativity scenes and statues of all sizes and materials in town squares and churches and homes. And I can remember the excitement as a child when my cousin Mark was like a drummer boy in his school's Christmas pageant. Now, today we feature a much larger cast of characters than St. Francis, or Francis featured in his original. We have drummer boys and shepherds and angels, magi, and a menagerie of animals, and even more, as we will see, which brings me to Napoli. But before I get to Napoli, 2 Christmases ago, Pope Francis made his way to the little chapel in that cave outside of Greccio, where you can visit as well to pay homage to Saint Francis and the first nativity. So let me get back to Naples. And this is via San Gregorio Armeno in Naples' old city center. And it's Christmas all times of year. And artisan workshops are busily working on, creating creche figurines and proudly displaying their not made in China signs. So this street is referred to as Christmas Alley. And again, it's Christmas every time of year. And this is because Naples is really the Presepio capital of the world. And it's been so for the last 300 years. Now, during the 1700s, creche figurines were an obsession in Naples. Wealthy families competed to create their, who has the most impressive creche. And when Charles III of Spain ruled Naples and Sicily from 1734 to 69, he owned a creche with nearly 6,000 figurines. So I want to have a closer look at some of these figurines. And you can see here that these have finely painted terracotta heads. Their arms and legs are carved from wood, and their bodies are shaped with wire and hemp. And here are some very glorious Baroque angels made of paper mache. And then you'll also notice some figurines having like nothing to do with the nativity story, like a fruit vendor, a chef with a pot of spaghetti. They weren't mentioned in any of the Gospels either, but these are very typical of Neapolitan style creches or presepio. And they're totally in the spirit of St. Francis, featuring colorful local peasants going about their quotidian tasks. And these figures are known as the pastori, and they're really my favorite because there's just an endless variety of them. While, the traditional figures, Mary and Joseph, the wise men, the shepherds, are technically the presepi. So the pastori are the locals, and the presepi are the traditional figurines. So this is in the convent of San Martino, which is at the top, on the hill in Naples. They have this wonderful collection of cribs there, and there's a huge presepio that's lit and these angels flying. Well, it only has about 1,000 figurines, so imagine what 6,000 would be like. And so this is not just at Christmas, it's on permanent display in the convent of San Martino. And here have a closer look at the Pastori neighborhood, which is really awesome. Check out those links of sausage and the little dogs. So here's another presepio that you can see in Naples, in the church of Santa Chiara, beautiful cloister there. And now you'll notice these like Roman ruins, which is very typical. You see them in presepio, and it's like this non sequitur. Okay, so what are Roman ruins there doing there? Well, the reason for it is that it was Charles III who had funded the exciting excavations that were going on in and around Pompeii at the time. So these discoveries were really a big deal. So they became integrated into, the local scenery. So here's the creche and the Baroque tree at the Metropolitan Museum of art. It's up right now, and it features 200 figurines. It's probably the finest in the United States. There's also a really good one in Pittsburgh. And the tree stays up in the Met's medieval courtyard through the Feast of the Epiphany, which is January 6th, the 12th day of Christmas, marking the arrival of the three wise men, bringing their gifts to the newborn king. And the Feast of the Epiphany is a really big day in the Eastern Church. And the word epiphany means manifestation, which as in like the revealing that Christ is the Messiah. And one of the signs of this was the arrival of the Magi as proof of this. In Italy, the Epiphany is also widely celebrated. It's a national holiday with parades reenacting the arrival of the Magi. This is in Florence. And here we see the Tre Magi arriving at the Duomo to present their gifts. So another reenactment. And the Epiphany also marks the arrival of the Befana, the Christmas witch. No kidding, it's a uniquely Italian twist, bringing sweets to good boys and girls placed in their shoes at night. And if they're bad, they get coal. And the Befana, her name is derived from the Epiphany. And she's said to live in a cave in Marche. But consider really that in Italy, up until like say 50 years ago or so, gifts were not a big deal, not on the 25th. And it was really, sweets given on the Epiphany. And it was, again, always gifts, small, but things that you would eat, desserts or clementines. And those gifts were given on the 12th day of Christmas, delivered by the Befana. So our notion of Santa Claus is much more a reflection of this Northern European custom exported to the New World in North America. But of course, with globalization, the tradition has now been pretty much, spread through the entire Christian world and non-Christian world for that matter as well, celebrating the spirit of generosity behind the giving of gifts on the 25th. So to conclude, I want to say a few words about food. I mean, there could be a whole presentation on regional traditions with Christmas and so on. But on New Year's Eve, it is traditional to have sausages and lentils. So the symbolism with sausages for the richness of life and accompanied by lentils for wealth and good fortune in the new year. It's also important to eat grapes for moderation and husbandry, the kind of built-in portion control with the grape. And something like strufoli, it's very, Southern, but panettone is eaten throughout Italy for Christmas. And growing up, my grandmother Nana made me panettone French toast for breakfast, which was really good. And then they have very unique tradition in Naples, which is tossing plates or kitchen items out windows, or just getting rid of your plates. I don't know what this is like to be there for that, but some of you know I had a restaurant for nearly a decade in Mount Kisco, and we would celebrate New Year's with Neapolitan, this tradition of Neapolitan plate tossing. And I would get a window frame that I set up on our bar, and I'd open it up and I had paper plates, and people would write down things like, what do they want to get rid of? Like COVID-19, and like wing it through the window. So anyway, so we would do that. And we started just New Year's Eve, but then I was doing it 3 or 4 days leading up to New Year's. So we have plate tossing. And then there's this tradition. It's actually become pan-European, but it started in Italy, of wearing red underwear for luck and love and passion in the upcoming year. And at the stroke of midnight, fireworks are everywhere. So I want to wish you all Buon Natale, Buon Capodanno, and Io Saturnalia, and just finish off with one thing that I had found in researching this, which was the cover of Life magazine, which is from the Chapel of the Magi, which I showed you earlier, which was Christmas, the first Christmas after World War II. And I just think it really speaks to the bonds between Italy and America and all the proud Italian Americans who had fought for their new country during the war. So again, I wish you all Merry Christmas. I'm happy to take any questions. If you have any last minute gifts that you need to give, consider the book, whatever. But anyway, I'm happy to take questions or comments or anything. So I hope you all enjoyed that. And if you saw it again, that you still enjoyed it, whatever. So yeah.
Well, thank you, Carla. I don't even know where to begin to thank you, because last year you gave us a beautiful talk about Italian holiday Christmas decorations. That was just the bomb we needed for the year we were having. We just needed something visually exciting and pleasing. And this year, you've taken that a step further and really given us an incredible journey that's not just visual, but really pretty heady. And I think we all learned a lot. I will say personally for me, every time you talk about your restaurant, I feel I am one of the unlucky people who didn't know you when you had the restaurant. And I think in 2022, in addition to having you come back and talk to us about some great topic about Italian art or culture, we need to figure out how to get you into the Taverna one night and do a food event with us. So you and I will talk about that, and we'll surprise the membership in 2022 with a fully sensory event with you. And I think we might have some, maybe not questions, just lots of congratulations about your presentation. So if nobody has a question, I think I will join Carla in wishing everybody Buon Natale e Buon Capodanno. And really, there's just, the chat is filled with people happy that they got to hear you this afternoon.
Well, great. And I'll also send you, I have details on the artwork and great. Where we'll it's located. Yeah. Because I didn't want to, I could have put it on the pictures, but I didn't want it interfering with the pictures. Yeah. So,
well, we will definitely see you in 2022. And thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon. Buon Natale, everyone.
Buon Natale. Ciao, ciao, ciao.